system that we have now is capitalism. Capitalism was an economic system in which the private sector controlled the production process through savings, capital accumulation, and investment. And the government played very little role. Well, now the U.S. federal government's spending $25 out of every $100 spent in the economy, and the central bank is creating the money and manipulating its value. Moreover, the production process is no longer driven by saving and investment. Instead, it's driven by borrowing and consumption. In 1964, the total credit in the U.S. was $1 trillion. Now it's $50 trillion. There's been a 50-fold increase in credit in the last 50 years, less than 50 years. This credit expansion has completely transformed the size of the economy, the structure of the economy, and in fact the economic system itself. In my view, we've moved from capitalism to creditism, for lack of a better word. Now creditism is in crisis because the private sector is incapable of repaying its debt.
Okay, Arun, if I can go to you in New York. So Richard, thanks. Let me go to Arun in New York.
The economy is now dependent.
Let me go to New York here. That's a very interesting point that Richard brings up. But we don't even have capitalism anymore. We don't even need to talk about its end because we're in a totally different system anyway. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we could talk about the myth of capitalism, the myth of the free market. There never has been such a thing as a free market. Governments have always intervened, usually for the benefit of capital. The railroad boom, of course, involved a massive transfer of wealth, especially in terms of land, to the railroad industry. The post-World War II capitalism boom was in many ways, especially in the West, was a fusion of the state and corporate interests. So there's nothing unique about that. And in terms of credit and financialization, these are nothing unique either. In the 1920s, you also saw a huge expansion of credit that fueled the stock market boom. Financialization goes hand in hand with capital. We should see the post-World War II boom as the aberration. I know we're going to keep coming back to this, but this was a period of unparalleled growth for unique historical circumstances. And we do have a hybrid system. Largely, it is controlled by corporate interests. And the thing is, capitalism tends towards monopolies, as we've seen in many historical period. And these monopolies will exert power over the government to increase their share of the economy, to increase their wealth, to increase the upward transfer of the wealth. And that's what is really going on in this period. And again, it's nothing unique historically.
Okay, Tom, I'd like to go to you in Washington. What is different about this economic turndown for capitalism? We've already heard about credit. Was it the deregulation? Was it just preferential treatment towards corporation? Was it poor tax policy? What is unique about the challenges that capitalism is facing today?
Well, the big problem is a crisis of interventionism. And indeed, Richard pointed out that state institutions, the central banks, pumped out gigantic amounts of credit. I mean, setting interest rates into negative territory. 2004, 2006, the Fed had negative interest rates. This is not a capitalist phenomenon. This is politicians intervening into the economy to pump it up and create a short-term boom. This created an asset bubble. This is a completely predictable result of expansionary monetary policy of that sort. Okay. And then interventionism through Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, the Basel Accords poisoned the world financial systems. So what we've seen is a real failure of interventionism and cronyism, not free market capitalism. We have a real case of mistaken identity here as to what is responsible for the crisis. People such as Arun, who say it's an increase in greed. Look, greed is a pretty constant thing in human society, and there's no metric that showed it increased. But we do have very good metrics of Fed policy and governmental policy to create an asset bubble that then burst, and now we're living with the consequences. But we have seen, and this is something that really bears repeating, is a huge increase in per capita incomes around the world because of free market capitalism. India and China, China after 1978, India after 1991, literally hundreds of millions of people lifted from terrible poverty caused by socialism and lifted into middle-class prosperity. This is the largest poverty reduction experience in all of human history, and it's happened in our lifetimes.
Arun, it looked like you wanted to jump in there. I mean, one of the interesting things about today's capitalism, or maybe the capitalism of our generation, we've always associated capitalism with civil liberties and a strong middle class. Now, what we just heard from Tom is that we have rising middle classes in the emerging world, but we have in the industrialized world, we have middle classes that are being pulverized, okay? So capitalism means something different to different people in different places, apparently.
Well, first of all, in terms of India, having been there frequently, that's a nice fantasy to tell people that hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty. Something like over 80% of the population is in moderate to extreme poverty. A few tens of millions of families have been lifted out. But when you're talking about a population of over 1 billion, it's not that significant. And what you have also is massive dispossession going on, and we cannot, and that's important to remember.